I am just going to say it's an honor to be here. Like, I really feel grateful to take this time this afternoon to spend with you. Eric, I know he's kind of seated and he's kind of built it up. As you know, I'm the best-selling author of this book called The Marriage Advice I Wish I Would Have Had. You guys heard of that? You guys heard of that? Yeah. And it's funny because my original presentation was all going to be about marriage advice or relationship advice. But there's a part where I've realized, I wrote that book, when I was single, shortly after my divorce, and I had this post that went viral, and I just had all sorts of good ideas and really, really brilliant wisdom. And so for a short time while I was single, I was giving a lot of marriage advice, which was fantastic. And what was amazing is I saw a lot of people get results. I saved a lot of marriages. Like, it was really phenomenal to see what happened. So I really, really, really loved that space, being able to take my pain, to take my mess, and to turn in my message. Anyone ever feel that you have learned things from your journey, your pain, that you want to share with others? Yeah, so I've noticed that that's been a lot of my journey. And then when it really comes down to it, after I got remarried, I'm like, I have no business giving anyone advice. My wife frequently tells me to go read my book. So for the sake of authenticity, I'm not going to talk to you about marriage advice. But I want to have a real talk with you. Like, I want to really... Sometimes when we come to workshops and seminars, we come because we have this huge desire to create new results in our life. We have this big driving passion. Some of you want to launch a business and serve more people with your message. Some of you do want to heal your relationships. For some of you want to transform your body. For some of you just want to feel more confident or happy or sexier or healthier, whatever it might be, right? There's a reason, all of the above. Who wants all of them? So there's a reason why you're here right now, right? There's a reason why you've invested this time, and I just want to acknowledge Eric and his whole team for putting this on. Can we give them a huge round of applause? Because it is an incredibly bold and brave thing to take your message and put it out there in front of the world and say, hey, here's what I want to share with you. And Eric's done that really powerfully over the last several years, and it's been an honor to watch his journey. But I also recognize that sometimes when we're at workshops and seminars, we're so inundated with new ideas or new inspirations, and it's almost like we're confronted with all the things that we know aren't working in our life. And it feels really overwhelming, and it's exciting at the same time, because we see this whole other possibility. It's like, oh my gosh, this is what my life could look like, and this is where I'm at, and there's this huge gap, this sense of frustration, right? But also combined with possibility. And what I've noticed, for the last 10 years, I've been blessed to do workshops, trainings, seminars, coaching programs, whatever it might be. And I've noticed that there's a huge, huge discrepancy between those that come and get inspired and get all the information, and then what happens after. Because there's always a certain segment of the population that they just take the information, go implement them. You see them 6 months later, and they're like, oh my gosh, Gerald, my life is completely transformed. I just made more money than I've ever made in my life, or I'm transformed. I love hearing those stories. But then there's this other segment of the population, which honestly, sadly, is the bigger percentage, which they'll go to the workshop, they get the information, they get inspired, and then they go home and nothing really changes. Just by a show of hands, how many of you have ever gone to a workshop, gotten some great ideas, read a book, been inspired, and not really fully implemented what you learned? Raise your hand. Raise it high, raise it high. Okay, there we go. Come on. All right. Thank you. I just want to make sure we're all in the same club. You are a producer. I know you go and take action. I know you're really powerful at that. But I know for the most of us, we are inundated with possibility, but we fail on the follow through. And so that's really, as I was really just getting grounded today, what I want to focus our conversation on. I want it to be a conversation. Normally, when I'm speaking, I have my whole presentation. I don't want to do that today. There's part of me that just wants to be open, be real, be like honest with you, and have some real talk, because right now I don't think you need hype. I don't think you need excitement. I think you need like real practical, tangible things that are going to change your life. How many of you want that?
Yeah. Thank you.
So we're going to do this, and I actually, I'm going to invite Eric to come up here in a moment, and we're just going to have a dialogue between each other and with you, and we're going to dig into this real conversation, which is what is required to create real, lasting results. How do you actually walk away from these days so that it makes the impact that you want, and not leave it with just a bunch of ideas that you never do, and you just feel worse about yourself because you didn't actually follow through, you know? So I want to have this conversation. So can we invite Eric to come up? Give him a big All right. Real talk.
Bailey instead of Rogers and Hammerstein.
Rogers and Bailey. The
circus has arrived.
I was kind of laughing, making fun of these ridiculous mics. You know, they're so big. I feel so like lopsided.
Tony Robbins used to do.
I know Tony Robbins does, but he also has a monstrous head. Like it's huge head, so it's all proportional.
Well, he has a monstrous everything else too.
I don't know about everything else. I haven't seen everything.
Awkward Silence 101.
You guys need two ferns up there.
Two ferns. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. And I feel like
One in the
One on
middle,
each
right
side.
we're
behind
just
you.
gonna have like a little talk show. I like this. So this is totally impromptu. I was telling Eric, I was like, before we came in, I was like, Eric, I don't want to talk about marriage advice. Can we just give some real talk? And he's like, okay, what do you want that to look like? I'm going to bring you up on stage, and we're just going to answer questions and just give some real advice. Because Eric's a really powerful mentor and speaker, and I know for me, my greatest strength is when I'm digging deep into someone's blocks, really helping them understand where the real point of resistance is that keeps them from getting what they want. You know, because we all have our stories, we all have our blocks, and I'm hoping that during the short time that we have together, we can create some movement for you, right? Even if it's just a small movement, one or two core distinctions that will allow you to take all this information, all these ideas, all the inspirations that you've been having, and to act and implement them. And so I'm going to actually pose this question to all of you, but I'm going to have Eric give his perspective. Why is it that so many people fail to follow through?
Well, I think a big part of it is most of us that have lived on this planet for more than about 10 seconds are inundated with this feeling that we're not enough. And we compare ourselves to so many other people. And right before lunch, we talked about some of the differences between men and women. And women tend to give into a lot of fears more often than not. And men tend to give into shame more often than not. And the sad, unfortunate truth is I think a lot of us, and absolutely no exception to this, can actually find ourselves in one way or another, this is a really strong word, but addicted to those negative emotions. Yeah. And a lot of us tend to give into this idea, okay, I'll never be like so-and-so, I'll never be like that, I'll never live up to this idea that I have of myself that I want to be in my mind. You're familiar with a lot of Tony Robbins as well. He talks about a blueprint that we have in our minds. And he actually met with a very, very well-renowned celebrity. He didn't mention the person's name, but he said that this celebrity is a movie star, very, very wealthy, very, very beautiful, very successful, had a lot of friends, but she was very, very deep into depression. And when she met with him, she said, everyone tells me, what right do I have to be depressed? And I know I shouldn't be. I know I have so many blessings, so many amazing things going on in my life. I don't understand why I feel depressed. And she'd actually been on antidepressants and they weren't working. And he said, well, I can help you 100%. I know what's going on. And she said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, your life doesn't match your blueprint. And she said, well, what does that mean? He said, well, let me ask you this. what is it? If you could have anything in the world right now, what would it be? And she said, by this age, I figured that I would be married and I would have 3 children and they would just love me. And she goes, I know you know what happened with my marriage. It was pretty well publicized, and I guess she had recently got divorced. And barring a medical miracle, she wouldn't be able to have her own children at that point in her life. And so he said, well, why not just adopt? And she said, no, they have to be mine. He said, well, how come? And she said, well, then they'll always love me. They have to love me if they're mine. And he said, oh, interesting. Her life, as amazing as it was, didn't match her blueprint. And a person can have the most incredible finances, the most incredible body, the most incredible relationships, and literally have everything going for them, and they'll be in and out of rehab their entire life.
Isn't this so interesting? Like you see like these beautiful magazine models, like so gorgeous, and it's interesting because a lot of the models that I've met are some of the most insecure people I know, just because they're constantly in this identity crisis and trying to like measure up to this impossible standard, and it's a really difficult game to play. But I think we all create these impossible games, don't we? We all create these impossible like measurements of like what we should do in order to be successful. If I had this, then I'd be successful. If I did this, then I'd be successful. If people saw me this way, then I'd be successful. And when there's that mismatch, just like he's saying, between what we think we should have or should do or whatever, and then what we're really experiencing, then it creates this space of unhappiness and depression. The way that I really perceive it is this. A lot of my work, whether it be coaching other coaches and speakers how to get their message out there, or really digging deep into transforming, someone's emotional state or whatever, it really comes down to this one core concept. And that is identity. Identity is the source of every part of your experience. And for me, when I really look at the reason why most people don't create the changes they want, is because they have a certain identity that they've created for themselves, right? A certain picture in their mind of who they are, what their reality is. And what they want is somewhere outside of their reality. You get this? It's outside of their current identity. And so they have this identity of what they should do, an identity of who they are, what's really possible for them. And they're trying to create something outside of their identity, and it doesn't work. Why? Because it doesn't matter how many to-dos you have, how many how-tos you have. It doesn't matter if you know the steps to create $1 million in a year, if psychologically your identity is, hey, I'm only worth $45,000. Right? This identity is the oppressive thing. And so often when we get how-to books or when we go to workshops or seminars, we miss that component, right? We see the possibility, but we never actually shift how we perceive ourselves. There's a quote that I want you to write down. This is by a guy named Maxwell Maltz. And I think it's so relevant to all the work that I know we're committed to, which is helping people get long-term results. In order to get long-term results, we need to shift the way that we believe about ourselves, right? So he says this, he says, you can never outperform your self-image. You can never outperform your self-image. This is why we have also inside of us all these blueprints of what we believe that we can do, what we believe we can have, and in that existing blueprint of our current reality, we all have like a money blueprint, a money thermostat of like our upper limit of what's a lot of money. And it's interesting, you talk to someone, it's like, what's a lot of money for you? It's like, oh my gosh, $1,000. If I had $1,000 right now, I would feel rich. For other people, it's like, wow, if I had $10,000, I would feel so abundant. And for other people, that would be depths of poverty, And for other people, it's like, oh my gosh, $100,000 is a lot of money. And for other people, $1 million. But can you imagine if someone like Donald Trump only had $1 million? How would he feel? He'd feel broke, right? Because his identity is built around having billions of dollars, right? And then a lot of people, their identity is based around being below zero, right? And so we try to create and do new things, but we don't shift who we're being in that process and what we believe about ourselves. This is so much of where he believes in internal paradigms come into play. And so I want to share some tips, but Eric, for you, to shift someone's identity so that they actually will follow through with what they need to do. Because here's the deal, this is something that I noticed, just a little anecdote really quick. Years ago, I hated exercise. Going to the gym, oh my gosh, it was a miserable experience. Anyone relate to that? I don't want to go to the gym. Oh good, 2 of you, fantastic. No, seriously. How many of you ever dread going to the gym, working out, all this, right? I did not work out. I did not. Running, forget it. Why would I run? And so, but I recognized that there was this time for me to change, right? When do we really change? We change when the pain of staying the same is greater than the change, the work that's required to change, right? Pain is your greatest friend. I want you to remember this. Pain is your greatest friend. Why? Some of you are like, oh my gosh, I'm great at that one, right? I'm great, but pain is your greatest friend. When you embrace the pain, you then can step into the challenge, right? Rather than run. Most people run from the pain, right? They sedate themselves, they mute it out, they distract themselves, they do whatever it takes to not face the pain, but they don't understand the pain is the catalyst for change.
They're good at chanting pain.
What's that?
They're good at chanting pain. We did that yesterday.
Pain. Oh, that's right. This is the pain group. Pain. But really, pain is your greatest ally in growth. It is, right? The moment you're so frustrated with the job that you have and you really know that it's time, then great, right? Sometimes, going through a financial disaster is the best catalyst for creating wealth because you start doing something different. And so in that space, not working out, I remember being at the park with my kids. I got 4 kids. They were all running around and they're like, Dad, come play with me. I was like, no, I'm tired. I'm tired just looking at you guys, right? and it's something hit me. Just I was 33, 34 at the time, and I was already acting like an old man. and so the pain was there, and I said, okay, I need to change. And so I set this ridiculous goal of running a marathon. Anyone ever run a marathon before?
No.
Anyone ever think about running a marathon?
No.
Anyone wonder why anyone would ever run a marathon? So what I noticed is this, and this is really relevant as we talk about health, as we talk about relationships, as we talk about all these other. My identity at the time was, I don't like to exercise. I don't exercise. I'm out of shape. I'm not a runner. I am too tired, right? We have all of these identities that are the beliefs inside of us. And so, of course, was it likely from that identity that I could ever run a marathon? Could I read books about a marathon and, study exactly how to do it, create an exact game plan in terms of diet and exercise, have all that lined out, but with that belief, would I be able to create the result of running a marathon? Yes or no?
Yeah.
You can never outperform your self-image. So for me, in order to actually run that marathon, I had to do a lot of identity work. Shifting the way that I saw myself. Shifting the possibilities that I had in terms of who I was. And what was powerful is, as I started to do that work and started to follow through with the game plan, there came a moment, and for some of you, I want to tie this back to building your business or changing your relationship or whatever it is you want to do. There came a moment, about 45 days in, where I was in bed, I woke up, I looked at the clock, it was 5 a.m., and my body was like, I want to go running. I was like, what's happened to me? What's happened to me? There was this moment literally where it's just I don't recognize myself because I'm not who I used to be, right? I craved running. And I built this identity that, oh, wow, I love running. I love working out. And when it becomes part of your identity, then the actions are easy. As long as it's outside of your identity, you're never going to follow through because self-will, self-discipline, it's bullshit. You'll never be able to outperform your self-image no matter how hard you try. Self-will is never enough. Willpower can never accomplish the goal. But once the identity is there, then it's easy, it's natural. If you thought and believed the way a millionaire did, guess what you'd have? Because you'd be doing what? You'd be doing what a millionaire does, right? You'd be responsible with money, you'd be creating, you'd be establishing value, you'd be producing, right? Once the identity is there, the result follows. But the crazy thing is this. When you're shifting your identity, you have to ignore reality. Sometimes people say, get real. That is the worst thing you can possibly do if you want to create change. Because you keep creating from the exact same blueprint that you're living in right now. So you have to be ridiculously crazy. It's the only way to create change, right? You have to ignore reality. And when someone, like if you want to shed 50 pounds, you have to stop getting on the scale and looking at where you're at right now. You have to stop looking in the mirror and saying, I'm so fat. You have to ignore reality and get that picture so clear in your mind that you really feel like that person that's 50 pounds lighter. Or that person that is making $100,000 a month. Or that person, whatever it might be. Like, you have to ignore reality and really get to that point where you believe it, where it feels like it's already part of your reality. So, how do you do that? How do you shift your identity?
Well, first and foremost, it's important to understand and to recognize where your identity is. We do a lot of work helping people overcome addictions and helping people overcome depression, and it's fascinating. A lot of people will go to meetings and let's say that they're addicted to alcohol, they're alcoholics. People will stand up and just like you said, they'll say, my name is so-and-so and I And I remember, yeah.
Whoever thought that was a good idea?
I don't know, and it's fascinating because these are the same people that come back to these meetings over and over and over again, and they're reaffirming every single week that they have this addiction, or that they are this addiction. I was partnered with another hypnotherapist that said, a smoker smokes, a gambler gambles, a drinker drinks, and so on and so forth. And if a person identifies as one of those things, then of course they can go a certain period of time without giving into those addictions. But eventually, just like you mentioned, if they identify with those addictions, there's going to eventually, it has to happen. By the laws of physics, the laws of psychology, it's going to happen. They're going to relapse and they're going to go back to those old ways. And so the first step, of course, is to understand that they and what they're struggling with, or even what they're achieving, are two separate things. And I say that because, even if a person identifies as a millionaire, then what happens if something crazy happens to their business and they lose some of their money? What happens if a person's net worth drops, let's say it's right at $1 million, and it drops $1? They're technically no longer a millionaire. And so then what happens to their identity? They can freak out. They can go, they tie their personal value with that, whatever it is. Tony Robbins has an anecdote of something you may have heard this. It's a story about a frog and a scorpion. And frog is hopping along by this lake when the scorpion comes up and says, I need to get to the other side of the lake. You're a frog. You can get me there. Let me ride on your back. And the frog goes, are you kidding me? I'm not stupid. No, if I give you a ride, you're going to sting me, and then I'll die. The scorpion says, are you kidding me? Come on. You're not using your little frog brain. Come on. Yeah, if I sting you, yes, you'll die, but I'll die too. I'm not going to do that. Come on. And the frog goes, well, you got a point. And so he goes, okay. You talked me into it. Okay, I'll give you a ride across the lake. And so the frog gets into the lake, the scorpion climbs on its back, and they're about halfway across the lake, when sure enough, the scorpion stings the frog. And the frog, as he's dying, goes, what'd you do that for? Like seriously? I'm gonna die now, but you're gonna die too. And the scorpion says, you knew that because I'm a scorpion, and that's what we do. We sting frogs. And so, I mean, it's fascinating that so many people, again, just identify themselves with those things. And so, step number one is understanding what your true identity is. And whether you're religious or not, figuring out what your connection is to what you believe the divine to be.
Can I add here, because so often, like the first step to identifying who you are is getting clear on who you're not. To get clear, you're not your results. You're not your job title. You're not your clothes. You're not your things you own. You're not your bank account. You're not your car. You're not your habits. You're not your addictions. Because he's true. Like if you say I'm an addict. I'm an alcoholic. That's not who you are. You're not your emotions. So many people say I am depressed. Right? You're not. You happen to be experiencing depression. Very different things, right? Do you notice the difference? Like this is really important because you have to break the identity from the false identity if you want to create real change.
The interesting thing about the English language is in other languages, like particularly in Latin languages, they have a distinction between like identity and what they currently are feeling. Like, how many of you speak Spanish? Yeah, ser and estar. In Spanish, like for example, if you were to say I'm sick, you would say estoy enfermo, which basically means I am currently sick. I'm feeling sick. Like you would to say like I am Eric, I would say soy Eric, which means this is who I am. This is who I identify with. And so in other languages they have a distinction, but we in English, for whatever reason, we don't have that. So yeah, just like you're saying.
And so once you identify who you're not, just realizing you're not even your body, you know? You look at that body in the mirror, it's not you. It's not you. Because every cell in your body is different now than it was 5 years ago. It can't be you. Right? But we build our self-esteem off of how we look and what we have and what we do, and none of them are who you are. None of them are who you are. And when you can kind of separate yourself and get really curious, okay, who am I really? Get really down to the core, like you realize you're not even your thoughts. You're the observer of your thoughts. How could you be your thoughts if you're sitting there observing those thoughts? And so sometimes we have these crazy thoughts and we think that's who we are. It's not who you are. So who are you? After you clear out all of the garbage of the false identity, then you can get really curious on who you really are. And you know, I think there's things Eric and I could both do to shortcut that path for you, but the reality is there's so much in the self-development world that is pure fantasy in terms of, the quick 3 steps to da-da-da-da-da, right? It's not quick. It's a lifetime journey of figuring out who you really are, what your purpose is, and how you can best express yourself in the world. You know, you have these moments of clarity, and then you go back to sleep. Moments where you're awake and it's like, oh my gosh, I get it. And you're like seeing through the matrix and you like really understand it. And the next morning you're yelling at your kids, right? And the next morning you're feeling sad because someone flipped you off or whatever it might be. Like we will fall asleep over and over and over and over and over again. It's life. So don't judge yourself if you're not there immediately. Just be patient and be willing to continue on the work. You know, that's especially we get in the space of judging ourselves against others. What a ridiculous game. What a ridiculous game. Like we see someone else, oh my gosh, they're doing so amazing. We see them on Facebook. It's hilarious that we judge ourselves based off what we see on Facebook. I can make myself look amazing on Facebook. And then when you really like, oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. But then it's so easy for us to not share the shadow, the ugly parts, the messy parts of the journey. And so we're always constantly judging our blooper reel against someone else's highlight reel. Like, oh my gosh, they got it all figured out. Look at them. They're in Hawaii again. Why aren't I like that? Right? And we get so ridiculously stuck in this judgment game, which is so irrelevant. Who cares what they're doing? Who cares about their life? That sounds really callous. I'm not saying that. Like, love them for who they are and celebrate their journey, but focus on celebrating your journey for what it is. And you're not in a competition. You're not competing against anyone. You don't need to be more beautiful, more rich, more like, you don't need any of that. You just need to really fall in love with who you really are. It's so funny because I work with a lot of business owners and entrepreneurs and help them grow their business, and a lot of that like strategic work. And I'm like, even with them, as much as they want strategy and tools and marketing systems, all that, none of it matters unless they love themselves. But you can't love themselves if you don't know, if you're still attaching to the false identity. Does that make sense? So, upgrading identity. Are you guys appreciating this conversation?
Yes.
I think it's really, really potent to be able to look at and to evaluate. But how do you shift identity? Like, what's the core? If we could share with you a formula, we're just going to bounce back and forth.
For sure.
The formula for upgrading your identity. What is that?
One of my favorite ones, tools to use, and I know you talked about, this is a quick, 3-step tool, and it may seem like that at first, but no, it's something that you must use every single day. It's called the Who I Truly Am poster. It's something that all of my one-on-one mentoring students, it's part of their program. They have to do it. With all of my IM clients, they pay in full, and then they have this list of challenges to get done before we even start our appointments. Like, we don't actually get started until they're done with this. And it's because doing these things lays a foundation for their success. It helps me know that they're on track, that doing this stuff teaches them the algebra, so to speak, so that we can hit the ground running with the calculus. Does that make sense? And one of the tools that they're required to do it is to create what we call a Who I Truly Am poster, which means if they go somewhere where they can be totally alone and they connect with their higher power, whether they call their higher power, like me, the Heavenly Father or God, or whether they call their higher power source or universe, they put themselves in kind of a meditative state and they say, okay, how do you see me? And they stay in this state until they get an image in their mind. And then they draw it just to the best of their ability. And obviously it doesn't have to be a masterpiece, but they just draw this image, and then on the sides, they write down all the characteristics of this person that they see. And the first time a person experiences this, it's really tempting to go, oh, no way, there's no possible way that could be me. There must be some mistake, and usually what we have them look at themselves and they say, if that's how he sees you, that's who you truly are. And every single morning, as part of what some people call it a power hour, some people call it a morning routine, we call it champion training. They stand in front of that Who I Truly Am poster, they put their hands over their hearts, and they say several I am statements. They go through, I am powerful, I am divine, I am glorious, whatever it is that's on that poster. And it helps to really sink in what their true identity is.
I love that. That's so powerful. Affirmations or whatever, declarations, these I am statements are really important. And with that, words have power. So you need to be so deliberate about what words come out of your mouth. Especially the sentences that have I am as part of it. There's the analogy I use in a lot of my training is this idea that your life is a garden, full of infinite possibilities. And I say every word you speak and every thought you think is a seed for your future reality, right? When you say, oh my gosh, I'm so stuck. I don't know what to do. I can't move forward. I don't have enough money. All of those, what are the fruits that would grow from those seeds?
Negative results.
Right? Oh my gosh. Pain, frustration, poverty, scarcity, I'm fat, whatever it might be. Like, just imagine you're planting seeds that are creating your future results, right? And so you got to be super vigilant as the gardener in terms of words, and having a practice like this where you're intentionally feeding and programming your mind is really, really powerful, really important. And repetition is the key. Because when you're shifting your identity, for the first 20, 30 days, your mind is going to say, no, that's not me. That's right. You can repeat your affirmations all you want. You can record them, you can listen to them all you want, but for the first 20, 30 days, your mind's going to reject them because it feels different than what's normal for them. But there's this power of repetition that happens. Repetition combined with emotion, combined with images, creates a new identity. And so it's just that willingness to be crazy enough to keep saying those words, even if your brain's saying, that's not me. I'm not abundant, I'm not successful, whatever it might be. Right? So the second key that I'm going to share with you in terms of shifting identity is the power of visualization. The power of visualization. I cannot emphasize this more. And I actually love this. Like I'm having all these memories as I'm thinking back on my journey and times where I made the biggest changes and evolutions. And I was thinking about there was this time where I would do these meditations and I would listen to this. It was interesting at the time. It was called HoloSync. Are you familiar with that? It was like this meditation software that kind of balances the brain. It was really crazy technology, but I would listen to it and I would visualize, and it sounded like rain, but it was at this certain frequency. Like all into like the crazy stuff, right? But I would sit there and I would listen, I would visualize, and I would always go to this I would go visualize my highest self, you know. And for whatever reason, my highest self, like Sacred Gerald, like he always would wear like these really cool like white shirts, you know, kind of looked like I was like Indian monk / Jesus or whatever, you know. And so I would just go visit like highest self Gerald. And it was so funny because like about 6 months, a year later, I was in a store and I saw the Sacred Gerald shirt. I'm like, there it is. So for years when I would do like big events and stuff, I would always wear everyone else called it the Jesus shirt. But it was so funny, like I had that image so like anchored in and really, it's like I love having these conversations because I'm like remembering all the things. Oh yeah, I need to do that again, right? Because it shifted my reality and it helped me step into the space of confidence. And then there was another time that I'll tell you about specifically because I want to give you like really tangible examples of what we're talking about. The idea concept is placing you in the future so that you visualize with such vivid detail that it feels like a reality. When you come back to this reality, it's like, oh, this isn't real. Like to get that level of reality in your mind so that you're comfortable. When that is your reality, then you'll be drawn towards that future. So often we don't create with that type of clarity. And so just to give you another example, like really specific one, when I first really felt like it was my calling to teach and speak and empower people from stage, I was so nervous. Like my identity previous to that, I was so like scared about speaking in front of people. I was so nervous. I was the guy like growing up, like when I would give talks at church, I'd be standing behind the podium. My legs would be like shaking like that. And I'd be like bracing the podium so like I wouldn't seem nervous, but then I would just read the talk word for word, right? And people, all they would say is like, nice part of your hair, Gerald, right? So, but I was terrified, right? I'm really, really scared about that. But it's interesting that sometimes the things we fear most are where our callings really lie. And so I knew I needed to shift that experience for me. And so what I would do at that time was I would actually go, and I would go to this, I was living in Florida at the time, I would go to this park near my house, and I had an iPod that had Tony Robbins loaded. And I think Tony Robbins is like one of the best communicators I've ever heard. I still learn so much from him. But I would go, I would plug in my iPod, and I would in this park for about 30 minutes a day, probably for a good month. I would just imagine I was Tony Robbins on stage in front of hundreds of people, right? And I would walk around, I would move, and I would have the same tonality, and I was just repeating everything that I was hearing in my ears. But in my mind, I was imagining I was in front of a room of 2,000 people, like leading them and inspiring them, and at the same time, like really sharing this potent content. And this was a bad idea not to tuck this. All right, so I would be teaching, and when I finally started doing seminars, I remember like one of my first events, we had like 200, 300 people there, and I remember getting on stage, and I wasn't nervous at all, because this was a small audience compared to what I was used to. Does it make sense? I was used to, in my mind, speaking to 2,000 people, and all of a sudden, oh, 200 people, oh, this is really small, this is easy, right? Because I had shifted what? My identity. I had shifted who I believed I was, what I believed I was capable of. And so you hear about professional athletes and Olympians doing this all the time, right? They visualize their success. And it's crazy, I heard this like study that was done, and it was the study of, they had two groups of basketball players, and they separated into two groups. One group, they would take, and this group would shoot 100 free throws every day. Right? The other group, they would just visualize and imagine that they were shooting 100 perfect free throws, and they were feeling what that felt like, and everything was perfect, and they were like hitting everyone, right? So at the end of the 30 days or whatever, they actually had, these two groups like see who could perform better, and the ones that visualize actually did better. Now I'm not saying don't actually do the work, right? I'm not saying go sit and visualize and imagine. I'm just saying the power of visualization that helps them train. Perfect practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect, right? And this is why professional athletes always will envision and imagine the outcome. But the big question I have for people that aren't getting the results is like, are you doing them? Do you have creative visualization, creative meditation time built into your day? Do you have that crystal clear goal, that vision for your future that you're actively creating? And most people would say what? No, right? Why? Because they're too stuck in the current reality, too stuck creating the exact same thing to create something different. So creative visualization is incredibly powerful, incredibly simple, but oftentimes people don't do what's simple. They want the complicated, they want the fancy, they want the new. But it's not the new that makes a difference. It's applying the same time-proven principles that have been there forever. All right, one more.
Okay. First and foremost, everyone reach over, wrap your arm around the person next to you. And give them a little shake. And just say, aren't you glad to sit next to me? Give your neighbor a high five and say, you're awesome, you're awesome. You're awesome. So one thing that I would like to ask you, obviously you became a best-selling author, and your post went viral when you turned your message to a message. That's something that I really admire about you, is you're always very, very vocal about some of the messes that you've had in your life, and I say that very sincerely, because you've turned so many of those messes into messages. And so it's my stage, so I'm going to put you on the spot here. If you could tell yourself right now, give yourself advice. Right now, what would it be?
That's powerful. So prefacing the advice, I'm just going to be real in terms of where I'm at. Like I feel like, wow. I feel like in terms of, I feel like I've been sucked back into some lies of what I should be doing in order to be successful. I don't know if any of you get this way, but I'm like, really, as I step back and look at it, it's like, oh my gosh, I've really gotten stuck back in this lie that says I need to do what I don't like in order for me to provide for my family so that we can have what we want, And because of that, I think my message has been a little bit like diminished, because I've been focusing a lot on strategy and money and how to make, $100,000 as a coach or speaker, right? Really pushing out that monetary message, but really at my core, I just want to connect people with God. That's what I want to do. That's why I'm here. And somehow I got stuck in this lie that says, I can't do that and make money, So the advice I would give to myself, and if it serves you, great, is don't hide yourself because you're not perfect. Don't wait until you're perfect to fully express who you are. Let that whole messy, beautiful journey be fully expressed, because in that expression, that's where the refinement comes. And in terms of my work right now, it's just go back to what you love. Right? And it doesn't have to be 500. Here's the challenge. I had this period in my life where my events where we had 500-700 people, and I was making way more money than I needed, and I felt like a king. I felt so powerful, so alive, so on fire. And then I went through a cycle of everything not working, if I can be candid, right? And in everything not working, there was this part in the whole identity thing where I lost that identity of Gerald the king, And I stepped into Gerald the guy that's just trying to provide for his 6 kids and try to, keep 2 houses afloat and try to manage the craziness of life. And in that space, I think I abandoned a part of myself that I really love, And when I'm here, in this beautiful intimate audience, I don't need a big audience. I just need people that get it, people that I can share my heart with, that I can really share my gift with, that I can really, really just be in that inspired, intuitive space, because that's where I feel most alive. That's where I feel most connected to God. That's where I feel most on fire and passionate about everything. That's where I feel most unstoppable. And there's this part of me that has in the past been selling out because I wanted to either recreate something that no longer exists, or to force my mind into creating something that I knew would make money, but my heart wasn't there. And as cheesy as it sounds, I'm thinking back to Napoleon Dynamite. What was the advice? The guy that was made president. What's his name? Vote for Pedro. Pedro just. Yeah, and he says, "Follow your heart, Napoleon." That's what I do, right? It's and it's so funny and cheesy. It's so true. Follow that heart, because that heart will lead you to that place where you are really going to serve and impact the world. And in that space, that's where you could be your greatest. That's where you could shine. So my advice to myself is, just do what you love, and it'll work out.
Love it. And so we have a few minutes left. I want to open it up to some Q&A, and it can be literally anything. It could be specifically about relationships. It could be about business. You have 2 CEOs here, 2 people that have literally made millions of dollars in the industry, 2 very, very imperfect people that are trying to get by at the same time. But
Perfect? What?
I know.
That idea.
I know. And 2 people that love pointy brown shoes. I just realized. So there's a connection there. And so even though this is an intimate audience, we are recording everything, just for our records. And so that was redundant. But let's grab the microphone. And if you would please, we want to celebrate you. And so, of course, when you get the microphone, please still stand up. Tell us your name, where you're from, and because we still want to celebrate you. So, yeah, let's go over here first.
Where?
Right here. There we go. So go ahead and stand up.
Stand up.
Yep. Go ahead and stand up.
All right, so I'm Hillary. So
From?
from Alaska.
Woohoo!
I've lived here just as long, but I'm still going to claim Alaska.
Good for you.
Sounds so much more exotic.
It is, right? Okay,
And
so,
cold.
and very cool, but beautiful.
But beautiful.
Anyways, so I'm sure this goes for a lot of it. In fact, Lori kind of spoke to this, which Lori, I absolutely loved your authenticity and how real you got earlier. That was amazing. But one thing, how, as we all feel a passion for this personal growth and for moving into different spaces, and sometimes our partners or spouses don't quite get that, or maybe that's just not in their DNA or whatever. How can we go about being in a close relationship with them and having them support us without trying to convince them or kind of be on the same page, but yet feel some support and encouragement from them?
This is a relationship advice question. I'm
It
totally
is.
into this.
I'm gonna let you give your answer first.
Yeah. So this is, how many of you have ever been in an intimate relationship with someone that was very, very different than you? Like, hold your hands up really high, right? So I know Eric trained on personalities. This is really relevant because so my personality tends to be very much visionary and healer, and for whatever reason, I'm really attracted to women that are oracles, right? That are oracles and that have like that structure and that discipline and all of that. And it's crazy because it's the greatest point of friction in our relationship, right? Because I just want to jump in and make things happen and see where things go. And my wife wants structure and details and plan and is really values that security and safety, right? Like there's very different values that you have. As you step into a relationship, like they're there for a reason. You attract that person for a reason, and it's really easy for us to make them wrong for the way that they think and what their needs are and what they want, especially when we're like, no, I just want to create this, I want to go there, right? And we have this big vision and it's super clear to us, but for them it feels very unsafe. And it comes back to a little bit of identity because they have a certain identity of the relationship, right? They have an identity of who you are, an identity of what your relationship is, and the moment you change, what does that do to that identity? It threatens it, right? It scares it. It's like, what's going to happen to this relationship? What's going to happen to... And as the more you step into changing yourself, the more threatened your spouse feels because they don't know where that's leading or what's happening, right? So first of all, understand it's normal and it's natural to have a spouse that thinks different, to disagrees. The people that actually have the spouses that are fully on the same page, 100% supportive, it's like, you go babe, you got it, I believe in you. Like, those are really, 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 really rare. Because in reality, it does bring up a lot of fears and insecurities, but the big distinction is understanding what's yours and what's theirs. Their insecurities don't need to be the deciding points of your life. Don't make your decisions based on someone else's fears or insecurities. You can acknowledge them, you can recognize them as a relationship. You have a responsibility to communicate about them, to do what you can to honor who they are, but to not make your decisions based on their insecurities, because what happens when you do that? You resent it, you get frustrated, you shut down, you have regrets. Is that really what they want from you? No, what they really want, when you really get down to their highest and best self, they want you to be alive, they want you to be excited, they want you to be passionate, and they want you to love and respect them, right? And so sometimes you have to get really clear, what is it they're really afraid of? And it takes a lot of honest conversations, but as you get more and more clear on what you are, then you can stand in that space of saying, hey babe, this is what I really want, and this is why, and here's what I want from you. I want to feel supported, I want to feel like you care, and I want you to trust me because this is really important. Right? And when you can be in that space of authenticity and honesty, and also listening to what their needs are, and validating them, then the relationship works.
And in addition to that, in most cases, you don't want someone that is exactly like you.
Well, you want it.
Well, some people think that they want it.
But what you really need is someone different.
And before Heather, my last serious relationship was somebody who, personality-wise, was like an identical copy of me. And I mean, I'm very, very warrior visionary. Oh my gosh, she was warrior visionary. And I mean, from the time we met and we clicked, I mean, right off the bat, you know, we met each other, and 2 days, like literally 2 days later, she sent me a message saying, I don't want to date anybody else. And I'm like, wow, okay. And I mean, to put into perspective, I mean, we spoke about marriage. Had we gotten married, we would have been Eric Michael Bailey and Aaron Michelle Bailey. And I mean, we talked about, oh, we'll get matching towels with our initials on it. Ah. And what's fascinating is, obviously the relationship didn't work out. And, you know, fast forward a couple of years after meeting Heather and falling in love with Heather and marrying Heather, Heather has the exact opposite personality as me. And so again, I'm very warrior visionary. She's very healer oracle. And what was interesting is going back and thinking about my personality type, like, I can't stand other warrior visionaries. Like, I mean, that's a really strong word. I mean, of course I do, but like, I couldn't put up with me, like another me. And I actually, you know, watched this girl get married multiple times, and multiple times it was over, I think, within a number of months. Multiple times, and I remember just realizing, holy smokes, that would have been me. Had I married her like we had planned on doing, it wouldn't have lasted a year. I'm convinced of that. And you know, once I met Heather and got to know her, you know, we like to joke around about it, you know, some of our differences and just some of the things that make each of us tick. And yeah, of course, we have a lot of similarities. We like, you know, the same sense of humor. We like to play around with the English language and butchering because it's super, super fun. And you know, we have kind of the same goals and dreams. But at the same time, there are so many things where we are planets apart. And a lot of couples will make the mistake when they're there of focusing strictly on the fact that they're different. Like, oh my gosh, you're so much different than me in this case, and that's where you're wrong. Rather than saying, ooh, you're different from me in this? Oh, fantastic, let's use this to our advantage. Like in our household, in a lot of circumstances, like the typical male-female roles, we're totally reversed. In a lot of cases, you know, like we heard earlier, like, oh man, I'm a woman, you know, you heard that video. In a lot of cases, I do the stereotypical female role. Like, one of my passions is cooking. And so, how many of you are coming to the Millionaire Dinner next week? Excellent. When you come, I'll actually prepare the meal. Like, instead of having it catered or something, I really, really enjoy doing that, especially, you know, hosting a whole bunch of people inside my home. It's something that I really love doing, but I can't stand cleanup. Like hate is a really strong word, but as close to that word as possible when it comes to cleaning up and organization, and that's my visionary coming out. Like, ugh. But I love being in cleanliness. Like, does that make sense? I want to be in the cleanliness, but I don't want to make that happen. Whereas Heather, on the other hand, she can't stand cooking. Like, it's drudgery to her, you know, it's just, I don't want to do this, or she doesn't want to plan the meal, she doesn't want to, you know, look up new recipes, but she really enjoys cleaning. I know, she's weird like that. And so, what do? I usually will cook the meal, and then we'll sit down and we'll enjoy it, and then Heather cleans up. You know, and of course, a lot of times people will see that and they'll say, well, wait a second, shouldn't Heather be doing that? Shouldn't, you know, this? We used to live in Immigration Canyon, and we had this ginormous driveway, crazy, crazy steep. And the wintertime, when it would snow, it would cost us $50 every time it snowed because we had to have it professionally removed. Because if we tried to do it ourselves, it literally would take like 6 or 7 hours. But it happened to snow on a Sunday, and we had some family members over. And Heather, I think, was like 8 months pregnant at the time. And I woke up, and I went downstairs, and I said, oh, where's Heather? And they're like, what are you doing, Eric? And I said, what are you talking about? I just woke up. I'm like, Heather is outside shoveling the snow! And I went, that's interesting. So I walked outside, and Heather's out like, you know, doing her thing. And I said, Heather, you don't have to do that. You're pregnant. She goes, no, I enjoy doing this. And so I went back inside, and like these family members like started to shame me for forcing my wife to do all the manual labor. And I'm like, Okay, first and foremost, she's got a ton of Oracle in her, crazy stubborn. I couldn't force her to do anything if I wanted to. Second, that's just something she really enjoys. She really enjoys doing like the physical work, the physical labor, and so like she's in charge of the setup when we do these live events. She does really, really well with AV. Can we give her a big wahoo? But, I mean, she'll be the first to tell you, she does not like doing the brain work, like the creating of the classes, creating the curriculums, creating the, the manuals, creating the CDs. She'll add input, and so like she's an avid reader. She'll read book after book after book. How many books a month would you say that you read?
A lot. I'm in like 6 or 7 different books right now.
Yeah, like every single month. And then we'll go on our dates, and she'll be like, oh, can I tell you all about the books that I'm reading? I'm like, yes, please, because then I don't have to read them, right? And she'll give me like the Cliff Note versions, and I'll be like, oh my gosh, thank you for reading that. We need to include that in our next seminar. And so, like I said, a lot of people will focus on their differences. My advice is to focus on how those differences complement each other, because you don't have to, nor do you want to be all the same. Even when it comes to dreams, even when it comes to ambitions, find a way that the two of your ambitions can complement each other. And then you'll find that makes a huge difference in your marriage.
And every once in a while, you just have to make your own decisions, which is sometimes hard in honoring relationships, right? Like, we always want to be on the same page, and sometimes we're not, right? And especially when you have the client, you need to do something, and they are digging their heels and they're adamant. You have to honor and respect your differences, but you also have to make the choices based on what's true for you too.
Did that answer your question? Great question. Big wahoo! Excellent.
Let's get one more, and we need to make it really short. Let's get a Christian.
That's your name for us.
Christian from Oakley.
Wahoo!
And I'd love to include Heather in this if possible, if there's time. So my question is, and it's a relationship question, how do you choose in when you have your own insecurities that are coming up that maybe leading you out? How do you choose in?
I think it's a fantastic question, Eric.
Yeah.
Ask Heather.
That's a fantastic question, Heather.
Please rephrase it. Let's say it again.
Okay, so when you have your own insecurities and possibly you're projecting that they're coming from the spouse, how do you choose in? What are some practices that helps you choose in?
Choose into your dreams.
Choose into
Choose into the relationship and not like run away when you might feel wounded or hurt or.
So let me clarify. Choose into being in this relationship when you have insecurities about what they're doing.
Right, so this is what I'm hearing. Right. So how do you actually choose to stay in a relationship, to fully engage in the relationship? And full engagement's a big thing, right? Because it's easy to be there physically. It's a whole different thing to be there physically, emotionally, and to really choose to do things. And the reason why like this is a really relevant question for me too. Like I notice that there's so many things I know I should be doing as a husband that sometimes I just don't want to do, right? Because I'm hurt, because I'm wounded, because I feel like I'm not getting what I want, and so sometimes it's hard to give when we feel empty or like even like, is this even what I want? Do I even want to be here? How do you actually choose to fully engage when you are feeling wounded, when you are feeling hurt, when you are feeling like it's not what you want?
For me,
Oh, go ahead.
I'm not sure. Can
Is
you
that-
hear me through this?
Yeah.
For me, when I said yes to marrying Eric, I meant yes. And so, like my brain's almost not even understanding the question because.
Can you take yourself back to before you had made that?
She's in Oracle,
it's
so when she makes a
yes.
decision, she's in.
And so I'm
Right.
here.
She's
Maybe
not
I
like some of the
can
other
answer
personalities
it.
where
Man, because
visionary,
you
it's
said
like,
this.
we're in as long as it's fun, as long as it's comfortable. But the moment it's hard and painful, it's just like, we want to be someplace else, right? It's very different for an Oracle because like, I'm in, like, there's no other possibility, right?
Yeah, the thing about this is it comes down to this idea of being unconditional. And she and I have had this conversation before so many times because I've actually had kind of that same question multiple times, and I've looked at Heather and I've said, why are you still here? Like, I do not deserve you. Like, oh my gosh, like, I have not treated you the way that I should have, you know, in so many ways. And of course, you know, she tries to reassure me that I've given her the life of her dreams, you know. But when she and I said yes to each other, we said yes to everything we knew about each other and everything we didn't know. And we said yes to everything else. And
Which means you're even saying yes to who they become, even though it's different than who you married, right? Or who you got in a relationship with.
And you know, there's this meme that we like, and one of them says like, "How do you put up with me so much?" And it's like, "Oh, well, I put up with you too, so I guess we're even." You know, and it's this idea that yes, I have all of my insecurities, and sometimes I look at Heather, and I'll be straight up honest, I'll be crazy candid. I've had those thoughts before, like, oh my gosh, Heather would be so much better off if I wasn't alive. And she would be free to find so much of a better man, someone that would take care of her so much better, someone that would give her so much more than I perceive myself as being capable of giving her. And then I realized that, you know, both of us have those insecurities. Both of us have those moments when we felt like, good heavens, there's no way that I could possibly measure up. You know, it's always fascinating. There's that old anecdote where two women would sit in church, you know, right next to each other, and one of them would be thinking, oh my gosh, look at this woman. She's a mother and she's a businesswoman, and she's so well off, and look how beautiful her home is, and she's able to afford these beautiful dresses, and oh my goodness, if only I could be like that woman. And the other woman is sitting looking at her going, oh my gosh, she gets to be a stay-at-home mom, and look at all these children she's raised them to be so well, and she handmade her kids' clothes. Oh my gosh, if only I could be like that person. And it's coming to realize that when you're in a relationship, especially in a marriage, again, you've said yes to all of that, and it's allowing yourself to work on yourself with the other person.
I want to emphasize this, like, in terms of the real answer, like, I'm still searching for that answer. But here's what I can say. Being single like you are, it's pure fantasy, right? We want this perfect relationship with this perfect... I was actually reading this list, like this ideal list. I sat down and was like reading like the list of the person I wanted to marry, and oh my gosh, it is good. It is like pure romance novel, delicious. Like Nicholas Sparks could have written a better description of my ideal soulmate that I knew I was calling in, right? Oh my gosh, she was amazing. But it's pure fantasy, just like the romance novels. Right? It's pure fantasies. It's just like the chick flicks. Relationships aren't that way. I do know a few relationships that seem like they have it a little bit easier than others. But no matter who you pick, it's going to be work. No matter who you pick, it's going to be, I don't know how to say this nicely. She's going to have a shit ton of baggage, right? And you do too. And your mess is going to collide with her mess, and sometimes it's just going to be ugly. And then you do the work together, and you hold on, and you celebrate your differences, and grass is not greener on the other side, you know, no matter who you pick. So just pick someone you want to do the work with. Pick someone you're willing to get dirty with, you know, because it'll get messy. Get dirty with, yeah. So, on that note, I know our time's up. I just want to acknowledge, give Eric another huge round of applause. It's really soul-nurturing time for me, and just the final piece of advice I can give you as we go back to this conversation. How do you make transformation stick? It's just keep doing the work, right? Changing identity is obviously one big piece of it. But put it in your calendar and schedule time where you're going to be doing the visualizations. Create these rituals and habits that just become part of who you are. And And be patient with yourself, because it's really easy to paint this fantasy when we're at workshops or seminars of what the future is going to be or what my business is going to be, but the reality is it's just digging in and taking one day at a time and keep reminding yourself why you stepped in this journey in the first place. And love yourself in a way. You know, just love yourself, just celebrate. Because here's the final thing that I want to say. Sometimes I feel like personal development does a grave injustice, because so much of the message of personal development is, hey, you're not okay how you are right now. You need something different. You need to be something different. You need to find something different in order to quote unquote be successful. And that is total bullshit. You are perfect the way you are. I don't say that in any sort of like light way. You are. You don't need to have anything else. You don't need to be anyone else. You don't need to do anything else in order for you to be perfectly perfect. You know? The mess, the shadow, the pain, the frustrations, the bills, all of it, it's perfect. So just be nice to yourself. You don't need to change in order to be okay, and if you want to change, great. You know how to do it now. That's my message. And I love you.